The microphone slipped from Steve Harvey's fingers and hit the studio floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the Family Feud set. For 40 years of television, he had never dropped his mic. Not once, but standing there in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking into the eyes of a 75-year-old woman who had just spoken 7 words that shattered his composure, Steve Harvey forgot he was a host. In that moment, he became something else entirely, a student who had just received the most important lesson of his life. It started as an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The autumn sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting warm golden rectangles across the polished wooden stage. Steve was in his element, working the crowd with his signature blend of humor and charm. The Rodriguez family from Phoenix faced off against the Thompson family from rural Georgia, and the energy was electric. But it was Margaret Thompson who caught Steve's attention during the family introductions. At 75, she stood straight as an arrow at the end of her family's podium. Silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a navy blue dress that spoke of dignity and quiet strength. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that commanded respect without demanding it. "And who do we have here?" Steve had asked during the opening, his voice carrying that warm familiarity that made millions of viewers feel like family. "Margaret Thompson," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "Retired mathematics teacher from Millerville, Georgia." "Mathematics teacher. How long did you teach, Miss Margaret?" 42 years, she said simply, and something in her tone made Steve pause just a moment longer than usual. 42 years of teaching math. Lord have mercy. That's a lot of algebra and geometry. What made you stick with it for so long? Margaret's answer was quiet, but carried across the studio with surprising weight. Because every child deserves someone who believes they can learn. The audience had applauded politely, but Steve found himself looking at Margaret with new eyes. There was something about retired teachers that always moved him. The quiet heroes who had shaped countless lives without ever seeking recognition. The game progressed normally through the first 3 rounds. The Thompson family was holding their own against the Rodriguez clan, with Margaret's grandson David and daughter-in-law Susan providing solid answers. Steve cracked his usual jokes, made his signature faces at unexpected responses, and kept the energy high. But during the 4th round, everything changed. The question was innocent enough. Name something teachers hope their students remember about them. It was Margaret's turn at the podium. She stepped forward slowly, her weathered hands gripping the buzzer with the same careful attention she had once given to grading papers. Steve posed the question again, his voice bright with anticipation. "Margaret, name something teachers hope their students remember about them." For a moment, Margaret said nothing. She stared at the question board, but Steve could tell she wasn't really seeing it. Her eyes had taken on that distant look of someone traveling through decades of memories. The studio audience waited patiently, accustomed to contestants taking their time with difficult questions. But this wasn't about the difficulty of the question. This was about something else entirely. "That we cared," Margaret finally whispered, her voice so quiet the microphones barely picked it up. Steve nodded encouragingly. "That we cared. Let's see if it's up there." Survey said. The board revealed that cared about students was indeed the #1 answer. The Thompson family erupted in celebration, high fives and hugs all around. But Margaret hadn't moved from the podium. She stood there as still as stone, tears beginning to stream down her face. Steve's smile faltered. In 40 years of hosting, he had developed an instinct for when something was wrong. This wasn't the overwhelmed joy of a grandmother celebrating with her family. This was something deeper, more profound. He walked over to Margaret, his voice gentle. "Miss Margaret, you okay, sweetheart?" That's when she looked up at him, and Steve saw something in her eyes that stopped him cold. It was pain, deep and ancient, mixed with a kind of resignation that spoke of dreams deferred and recognition never received. "You know, Steve," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tears. I taught mathematics for 42 years, 5th grade through high school. I had thousands of students pass through my classroom. Steve nodded, sensing this was about more than just the game. I taught fractions to children who thought they were stupid. I showed teenagers how algebra could help them understand the world. I stayed after school every day for tutoring. I spent my own money on supplies when the school budget ran out. I attended their graduations, their weddings when I was invited, even some of their funerals. The studio had grown quiet. The Rodriguez family, still standing at their podium, was listening intently. The audience sensed something important was happening. 42 years, Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. Thousands of students. And you know what, Steve? Not one. Not a single one ever came back to say thank you. The silence that followed was deafening. Steve felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't about game show answers anymore. This was about a lifetime of service, of dedication, of pouring yourself into others, and wondering if any of it mattered. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He set down his cards, walked away from his mark, and approached Margaret at the podium. The cameras kept rolling, but Steve was no longer performing. He was responding to something much more important than television. "Miss Margaret," he said, his voice stripped of all entertainment value, all performance. "Look at me." Margaret raised her eyes to meet his. "You taught thousands of children mathematics. You stayed late. You spent your own money. You cared when nobody else did. Is that right?" Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Steve took a deep breath. "Miss Margaret, I never had you as a teacher, but I had teachers like you. Teachers who saw something in me when I couldn't see it myself. Teachers who believed I could learn when I thought I was too stupid. Teachers who stayed late to help kids like me figure out that we weren't failures, we just learned different." The studio was completely silent now. Even the crew had stopped their usual bustling. "So, let me tell you something," Steve continued, his voice growing stronger. "On behalf of every student who never came back, on behalf of every kid who went on to college, because you made them believe they were smart enough, on behalf of every adult who uses the math you taught them, every single day of their lives, on behalf of every person whose life was changed because you cared enough to stay late and explain it one more time." Steve paused, looking directly into Margaret's eyes. "Thank you." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Margaret's composure finally crumbled completely. 42 years of wondering if any of it had mattered, if any of her students remembered her lessons, if her life's work had made any difference at all. It all came pouring out in the form of tears that wouldn't stop. But Steve wasn't finished. He did something that no game show host in television history had ever done. He stepped forward and wrapped Margaret Thompson in a hug that was part gratitude, part recognition, part long overdue appreciation for every unsung educator who had ever shaped a young mind. "You matter," he whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Every lesson you taught, every student you helped, every moment you cared. It all mattered." The audience rose to their feet spontaneously. This wasn't television applause. This was something deeper. It was recognition, validation, the kind of standing ovation that says, "We see you, we honor you, we understand your sacrifice." The Rodriguez family abandoned their podium and walked across the stage. Carlos Rodriguez, a man in his 50s, approached Margaret with tears in his own eyes. "My daughter's math teacher changed her life," he said simply. "Thank you for doing what you did." One by one, audience members began standing and sharing their own stories. "Mrs. Patterson helped me pass algebra," someone called out. "Mr. Rodriguez stayed after school with me for months," shouted another. Steve realized that Margaret Thompson had become a symbol for every teacher who had ever wondered if their work mattered, every educator who had poured their heart into their students and never received acknowledgement, every person who had chosen to serve others without expecting recognition. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. "Miss Margaret," he said, pressing it into her hands. "This has my personal number on it, not my agent's, not my manager's, mine. Because I want you to know something. Anytime you wonder if what you did mattered, anytime you question whether you made a difference, you call me, because I'm going to remind you that you shaped thousands of lives. You were somebody's reason for believing in themselves." Margaret looked at the card through her tears. "Really? Really? And you know what else? We're going to restart this game. Both families are going to play together. For you. Because teachers don't compete with each other, they lift each other up. And today, we're all going to lift you up." The game resumed, but it was transformed. Both families worked together, calling out answers, celebrating every point scored for their honorary teacher. When someone got an answer wrong, instead of groans, there were encouraging shouts of, "That's okay. Try again." The kind of supportive environment Margaret had tried to create in her classroom for 42 years. But the moment that defined everything came at the very end. As confetti fell and music played, Steve called Margaret to center stage. "Before we finish," he announced to the audience, and the millions watching at home, "I want everyone to understand what we witnessed here today. We met someone who dedicated her life to making other people smarter, better, more confident. She did it without recognition, without thanks, without acknowledgement. She did it because it was right." He turned to Margaret. "Miss Margaret, every teacher watching this right now needed to hear what happened here today. They needed to know that their work matters, that staying late matters, that caring matters, that even when no one comes back to say thank you, the difference they made is real." Steve removed his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, his lucky jacket that had been with him through thousands of shows, and gently placed it around Margaret's shoulders. "This jacket has been part of every Family Feud I've hosted," he said. "It's seen families win and lose, celebrate and cry. But today it's going home with someone who understands what real victory looks like. Real victory is touching lives. Real victory is believing in people when they don't believe in themselves. Real victory is 42 years of making the world a little bit smarter, one student at a time." Margaret, wearing Steve's jacket like a robe of honor, looked out at the audience, at the cameras, at the millions of people watching at home. "To every teacher who wonders if it matters," she said, her voice clear and strong, "it does. Even when they don't come back to tell you, it does." The episode became the highest-rated Family Feud in the show's history, not because of the game, but because of the moment. The moment when a game show became a classroom, when entertainment became education about what really matters in life. Margaret Thompson returned to Georgia, wearing Steve's jacket and carrying a renewed understanding of her own worth. But more importantly, teachers across America watched that episode and felt seen, valued, appreciated for the first time in years. Because sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught with textbooks and blackboards. Sometimes they're taught with microphones and television cameras. When one person's pain becomes everyone's opportunity to say the words that should have been said decades ago. Thank you.